Thank you very much for being here on a Saturday afternoon. It's a great pleasure to welcome our guest from San Francisco, Dodie Bellamy, and also Fiona Alison Duncan, who's the co-creator of this wonderful Pippa Garner exhibition that opened last night. And we had a wonderful opening last night. And this afternoon is also the first public launch for this incredible new monograph on Pippa's work and life, and it's co-published by the three organizations in Europe that previously hosted the show: Kunsthalle Zurich, the Frack Lorraine, Kunstverein Munich, along with Birke Books and White Columns joined in at the end. It's also a great pleasure to have Dodie back at White Columns. It's a very long time ago, but in 2006, Dodie organized an incredible show for us here called Kathy's Forest, which was an installation of the late Kathy Acker's clothing, which the audience could move through. They were suspended from the ceiling, and it was a second version of that project I'd actually worked on with Dodie previously in San Francisco. And a year after that, we did a really incredible project with Dodie and the great guest Kevin Killian, which was oriented around the literary zine periodical, and included contributions from all kinds of people who had been drifted into the orbit of that. So anyhow, it's wonderful to have Dodie back here. And now I'll hand over to Fiona to this afternoon's proceedings, and you can buy books afterwards.
Hi. Thank you everyone. Thanks everyone at White Columns. They've been such an amazing, generous team. And thanks Dodie for coming. I note that Pippa is going to be on the phone in a plushie, incarnate in a stuffed animal afterwards. So if you buy a book, you can go and say hi and have a little moment with Pippa. So that's your bribe to buy a book. Kathy Acker and Pippa actually have some interesting things in common, which I wasn't going to bring up, but since Matt brought up this amazing show that you did, which I think should be a book also. They're both, bodybuilders who lived in the Bay Area, and willful radicals, and androgynous.
Was afraid of looking like a clown.
Right, yeah.
Incredibly expensive outfits.
We're both fuzzy-brained, right?
Yeah.
We were installing all week, or I was installing all week, and then we had this crazy opening last night. So my way of dealing with being disoriented is to over-prepare, and I hope that's okay.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to use all of this. It's just like my brain
I
download.
reread my essay in the magazine, so I could remember.
Yeah. Well, I'd like you to read some of it, or all of it, depending on what you like. But I want to say some things first before we do that, maybe?
Oh, sure.
So I wanted to say that I'm personally here in solidarity with my friends and all the strangers who are marching in Washington, D.C. today. And I want to talk a little bit, before we talk about the Fool, about Pippa's relationship with war and violence. Pippa is a Vietnam veteran. That is a portrait of her in 1997 that she took, a self-portrait of her in her Vietnam uniform. And Pippa wasn't always anti-war. She had assumed and accepted a lot of the pro-war messaging of her youth. She was born in 1942 to an upper-middle-class family in the Chicago suburbs. And her dad had not gone to war. I guess I should preface that I'm working on a biography about Pippa, so it's going to get a lot of biographical, less maybe art historical, so put up with my interest in people. So she became anti-war after going to war. She was drafted, and an upper middle class person probably could have figured out a way to avoid the draft, but her dad was obsessed with war. He hadn't gone to war. He had some sort of gastrointestinal issue that precluded him from going to war in World War II, but he was obsessed with it, and he would watch World War II videos all the time, and Pippa really came up in this consciousness that America had done a good thing in World War II. They had saved the world. So she wasn't so dissenting when she was drafted into Vietnam, but she became that very anti-war as soon as she got there. But she found out an interesting way to sort of save herself in that, which was she negotiated a position on a combat artist team. And this is a team, there were I think about 8 of them at a time, and there were a number of teams throughout the first part of the Vietnam War who were tasked with documenting it by making paintings and drawings. And that's sort of how she first had an assignment to make art. And then in the 80s, when she started gender hacking, she developed some philosophies or sound bites that she repeats to this day about war and male violence. She positions war as a hormonal issue. She calls it testosterone toxicity. And this is a quote of hers from a really beautiful essay by Mackenzie Wark that's also about fools. It's the theme of Wark's essay. Pippa told Wark, "I could see a point where all the leadership could be transgender. The problem with male leadership is a simple thing, testosterone toxicity. I think the whole idea goes back through human history. Testosterone is required for sexuality, for stimulation, for sexiness. You have to have some of it, but you don't want to have too much. The problem is that when it comes to leadership, it becomes a boast and a threat weapon. It becomes military." And she would later say, although her ex-wife Nancy Reese said this first, that we should spray the White House with estrogen and bomb. Lately, she says we should bomb the Kremlin with estrogen. It's not too much longer, and I'm handing over to Dodie. So when Pippa was researching vaginoplasty, which she underwent in 1993, she says she was moved by stories about ancient war tactics that involved castrating the enemy. Castrating, for example, prisoners of war in order to disarm the enemy and make them weak. So she had that in mind. So for Pippa, the act of sex change is not just about personal gender identity and her sexual desire. Although it is totally about that, it's also about consumerism, how one can buy a new sex or gender presentation, and how in doing so, one can't not deal with how sex and gender are codified and commodified along a binary in our culture. So according to Pippa, the gender binary is used to make people feel insecure and thus shop. Gender hacking for her is art. It's very much about the will of the artist, but her form of will is surrender, and this is where we're getting to the idea of the fool. Surrendering to intuition, to the unknown, to folly, to pleasure. When she first started gender hacking, she could not fully explain why she was doing this, and this was in the 80s and 90s. It was a very risky thing, physically, politically, career-wise, socially, and yet desire and intuition, this artist's will to surrender, guided her. And later, the conceptual framework and the language came to her. So she jumped into the unknown, into the experience. It's like the Fool card in the tarot, which maybe Dodie can tell us about more, because she knows more about that. And I would say it's this spiritual approach has made her work so transcendent and so relevant now. It's that one's pushing us into the future while telling us a very important history. So final point this, and not final, because there's always more with Pippa, but finally for my little intro speech, transition for her is also political. It's going back to this idea of castration and war. Transitioning was in part about renouncing male dominance and male privilege, which she sees as coming in or associated with the male sex drive and testosterone toxicity. So with all that in mind, in our current climate, life, war, genocide moment, we're going to talk about one of Pippa's chosen archetypes, which is more than a persona or pose. Although it comes off and on, and the people intimate with Pippa know a version of her that's very wise, less foolish. Although the fool can be wise, we'll talk about that. So this archetype of the fool. And I thought maybe Dodie could tell us a little bit about the archetype of the fool in general, and your relationship to it.
Now that I messed up their careful positioning of this, can you hear me? Okay, I could take it off again. I'm not a tarot expert, but we were texting back and forth about the Fool. And, if you look at the tarot as a journey, the Fool's the first card. So it's sort of like stepping off into the journey. That's what all I was saying. I kept relating to, I guess my husband, who died 4 years ago, did a lot of in his own way, similar stuff about playing the Fool. So I was like tapping into this, working on this in Pippa in ways that were not like healthy even. You know what I mean? I was just getting plugged into the whole notion of it, and I could see how doing that, it is a means of control, and it's sort of like once, it's almost, in my essay I saw it as a form of cloaking, and also a way like, it makes you invulnerable. And what Pippa had said to me is, if you go back to courts and the jester they were the one person that could tell the truth and not get beheaded for it. So it's a way of slipping past those societal censors.
Yeah, participating in a power structure, but somehow get out a free card of having to participate in the power structure while also critiquing it, but maybe your critiques aren't taken seriously or only by some, and so you can also get away with saying certain things. Like a Trojan horse, sort of. You start your book, maybe we can bring a copy of the book, When the Sick Rule the World, with the epigraph from Mike Kelly about what I dislike about a lot of contemporary artists is they want to be hipsters, they're not willing to be fools.
Did you put that in the book?
No, you do. You started it.
This one. Yeah. Oh, I thought.
No, your book, because we're selling those too.
Yeah, that's the
we're
thing.
cross-promoting too.
When I was forming, this book was sort of, just a collection of shit that I've written, and so I cut out. So anyway, I pulled together anything that seemed available, and then I cut out like 20,000 words, and I was trying to figure out what would go in it and what wouldn't, especially since Semiotext would have published all it with the extra. It wasn't like they were telling me to cut it down, and in fact they were a little confused why I cut so much out. But anyway, I based it on this like Mike Kelly quote that I took off of. Now I can't find where. Okay, I took off of some interview that he gave, like a video of it, and he wrote, "What I dislike about a lot of contemporary artists is that they want to be hipsters. They're not willing to be fools." And it's kind of a negative, backwards thing. But so anyway, I just kind of basically looked at each essay, and it was sort of like, to me, this is like, one of the, I'm like a Mike Kelly fangirl, so, it's sort of the way he could dip into these kind of libidinal realms, I think, just kind of, I never stopped exciting me. So anyway, that's kind of what I looked at. If I wasn't stepping into that fool place, and the essay wasn't quite pushing me toward being embarrassed, it didn't go in. Because I wanted it to kind of get out of here and kind of connect to the body. So that was sort of the guiding principle and what stayed.
And I think that instinct is why your essay on Pippa is so good. Would you be open to reading some of it?
Sure. I have let me get my.
Do you want this copy? The gallery copy, or do you have one?
You can read with these, but not efficiently.
So we're technically launching the book, and it's designed in many ways like a magazine. Pippa published in magazines. That was how she survived. And it has a lot of original content, like archival materials, very full. Let me find Dodie's essay. Here we go. Playing the fool.
But basically, it's Pippa who was directing this reading of her work.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll read some excerpts of interviews that are in the book too, just very short ones where she explains her position of a fool.
Yeah. Okay. So unfortunately, I read this morning. Wasn't going too much into, I should have changed that. Okay. Playing the fool. This morning, Pippa came walking toward me quickly in a sort of strut. Then I woke up. Rarely do I dream about anybody I know, yet there she was. I was surprised, and then I wasn't. Pippa and her art are sly like that, insinuating themselves into your psyche when you least expect it. Though her tone is frequently jokey, behind the ha-ha factor lies a shrewd social critique, registering angst, fear, and desire. Her work challenges conventional organizational structures of reality, troubling the divide between animate and inanimate, human and machine, hidden and revealed, and the use value of anything. In a revision, automobiles have pedals or drive backwards, vacuum cleaners and babies smoke cigarettes, forests ride around on the backs of flatbed trucks, and gasoline powers toothbrushes. Scale is all out of whack and the pun reigns supreme. Roller cars are attached like skates to bottoms of feet. Pool parties are sunken inside empty swimming pools. Pippa repurposes society's dejecta collected from thrift stores and salvage yards and sets them in motion. Her queering of gender is so profound, so radical, she leaves the male-female binary trembling in the dust. To write this piece, I hesitantly agreed to talk on the phone with Pippa. It wasn't an interview really, but more of a touching of bases. For someone who has such a flamboyant public persona, one-on-one she's very no bullshit. Even though much of what she told me I have read versions of in the slew of interviews I found online, I never felt like she was delivering a rote performance. After we hung up, Pippa immediately called me back. She wanted to know if I had any recommendation of Victorian romances for her to read. She likes books that don't have technology in them, particularly the Brontes, though she isn't a fan of Anne. I said Anne was like the Marxist Bronte. She was tough. I suggested my favorite Bronte novel, Villette. Also, Elizabeth Gaskell's Wives and Daughters, which I am currently reading in bed at night. I wondered why Pippa would think I would know anything about Victorian novels. Like, what kind of vibes do I give off? I tried to tell her, that the Victorian age was not anti-technology. It was the whole, when it all began, but she wouldn't go there. Okay. At 81, Pippa is living with chronic lymphocystic leukemia, linked to Agent Orange exposure from when she served in Vietnam. She's also dealing with pneumonia and progressive vision loss. She can't look at a screen with glare, so she reads her technology-free books on a Kindle set for large type and low contrast. In photos, she appears gaunt yet buffed. At times, her expression hints at a kind of shock, as if she's thinking, wow, how did I arrive here? There's hardly an inch of her body I haven't seen naked online. Pippa says it's a pleasure to be naked in front of other people. It's interesting, though, how many of her pieces are about containment and shielding. In the drawing of the mist collar, identity obscuring device, a sexy woman in a plunging dress that clings to her huge tumescent nipples wears a collar that sprays jets of fog upwards, obliterating her face. Simultaneously, she's exposed and veiled, suggesting that obscurance is an unstable position. For her 2014 Crowd Shroud performance, I think I missed something. Oops, Crowd Shroud, okay, excuse me. Crowd Shroud performance at Red Wing Fine Arts in Los Angeles. Pippa sat in a wheelchair encased in a snug wooden box. The windows of the enclosure were two-way mirrors, so Pippa could see out while moving through the crowd, yet remained totally hidden, save for her yellow boots that extended below the box's bottom. When asked by Nicole Miller in Extra Online how Crowd Shroud reflected her interest in the body, Pippa called herself an introverted exhibitionist. Artists are generally introverted, she continued, because it's an observer's vantage point. So you can't fully assimilate into culture. You have to stay where you're not altogether part of things. You're on the edge watching other people and making some sort of statement about that. But I also like to be on display somehow. That was one of the motivations of the sex change. With the sex change, you're making a visual statement. The way I relate to Crowd Shroud is that like anybody else, I have a huge desire to be seen. But before a penetrating gaze, I not only want to flee, I do flee. The box could be our homes or our computers, which especially after COVID have become increasingly difficult to leave. The wheels offer hope that human urge for mobility will triumph. After she was hit by a car in 2000, Pippa had her wounded leg tattooed in a wood grain pattern. She calls it her wooden leg. I think back to Ovid's Metamorphosis, when reality was more fluid and humans turned into trees, the quote from. Her prayer was scarcely done when a heavy numbness seized her limbs. Thin bark closed over her breast. Her hair turned into leaves, her arms into branches, her feet so swift a moment ago stuck fast in slow-growing roots. Her face was lost in the canopy. Only her shining beauty was left. Pippa says she feels inanimate objects, the life in them. She can tell if an object is alive or dead, and she grieves the death of cars. So when she says she sees her body as an object, it's not as harsh as it sounds. It's a form of animism, now privileging her, the human body, over other registers of being. Heavy. I'm reminded of the object sexuals I watch a documentary about. Women who fell in love with an archery bow, the Eiffel Tower, the Berlin Wall. What Gothic hero has been more misunderstood and maligned than the Berlin Wall, who just stood there, just was standing there like it was built to do? Pippa's inventions evoke a nostalgia for simpler times, when people believed in American ingenuity and superiority. In movie after movie, U.S. certified soldiers rush in with their guns and blast away the monster, be it space alien or Nazi. And then came Vietnam. Boys went over there normal and came back broken. Due to the anti-war movement, instead of being hailed heroes, they were scorned. The general sense I got from TV and movies and the vets I knew was a catastrophic collapse of meaning. The vets exuded a tense otherness I found impossibly sexy. The one I was involved with moved to LA after he graduated from art school, the GI Bill, and became a staff photographer for Guns and Ammo. The last time I heard from him, he had retired, and still he was having flashbacks. He told me that all Vietnam vets he knew drank too much, and like him, they were suicidal and heavily armed. Pippa told me the bullets in Vietnam were so fast, you could hear their whiz before the bang of the gun that fired them. So if you heard the bang, you knew you'd survived. Behind the topsy-turvy absurdity of Pippa's gadgets, I sense a vast pool of generational trauma. The court jester or fool is an important figure for Pippa. The fool is the one person who can say anything without being punished. Standing apart, the fool sees through society's smokescreen and tells the truth. An action figure staged at O Townhouse in Los Angeles, 2019. Pippa was suspended like a marionette from a metal scaffold. She wore a jester hat with floppy multicolored points as well as shiny red jester shoes, their elongated toes curling upward. Draped around her neck was a small white bib that read Living Dowel, in the same font that Pippa favors for her t-shirt collages. The way her slack body hung there with its eyes and mouth shut, she could have been asleep or dead. As with Crowd Shroud, she managed to be both absent and present at the same time. Bright orangey cords connected her to an exercise bike located behind her. Pippa researched classic marionettes to see where their cords were attached, and she attached her cords in the same configuration. Just this much left. Gallery visitors could ride the bike and pull levers that moved Pippa's appendages up and down. Pippa said men were much more aggressive than women when operating the levers, and this was an example of testosterone toxicity, a condition she also considers essential to the war machine. I asked Pippa if it hurt, and she said sometimes, adding that sometimes you need to suffer for your art. I asked her how she felt to dangle there at the mercy of the audience. She said she was neutral. The piece was about being a human puppet, and puppets are neutral. When I told her that a friend who was there was disturbed by the violence of the piece, Pippa said my friend was wrong. The piece was about being a marionette. It was not violent or disturbing because she didn't feel like a human while enacting it. Just from looking at the documentation, I can see that the performance blew art gallery smugness all to hell. If this was a failure in terms of Pippa's formulist intention, then that failure was perhaps its greatest strength. I was unsure whether to include the action figure material here, but this essay wasn't working without it. As I sat at my desk trying to describe the puppetry contraption, Pippa texted me, "Hope you make an ass of me in your writing." I didn't answer. Then an hour later she wrote, "Actually, I'd rather be presented as a fool than an ass, or a little of each. April Fool's is the only holiday I celebrate." Her timing was fucking eerie. Now it was I who felt like the marionette, Pippa from afar tugging at my ending.
I really love this essay. There's been so much writing about Pippa, and a lot of it is not contending with the shadow side of her work, this idea of generational trauma, the fact that there's a lot of joy and spectacle and pleasure and self-determination in her work, but then a lot of, angst, as you say, and loneliness. That's why we chose this as one of the main photos. She took after she got back from the war, she started taking photos all around Los Angeles. There's thousands of them that we found in her archive, and this was one of them. So she'd take photos of things that struck her, and what's amazing about these photos is they're all so her. Like, she could have staged every single one. She just had an eye for this pattern of her thinking and seeing. So the idea that joy was also tragic. So thanks. But Pippa really would not like us to dwell on the shadow side at all. So I thought maybe I'd ask you a little bit. So to contextualize, Pippa's ex-wife Nancy Reese told me something really brilliant, which totally makes sense, which is that in the 80s, before Pippa started dosing on estrogen, they were hanging around with a lot of psychonauts, like these California counterculture figures who were experimenting with drugs. It's Terrence McKenna and John C. Lilly and Andrew Weil, and what was the other one? The big guy who Anne Royer writes about, and I'm a Girl. He was like more of a rascal. Terrence McKenna was like quite of an angel. Andrew Weil is where Pippa got the term testosterone toxicity, actually. Anyway, so this idea that you're manipulating consciousness and exploring consciousness is also part of dosing on estrogen and using it as a drug. And this also relates to California counterculture, which she's emerging out of in her own really distinct fashion. Which made me think of, there's this text that Dodie wrote called The Rascal Guru, which is in this book. And I was dating Dennis Hopper's son, and he was a real manipulative asshole, rascal guru type. And I read this essay, this was 2016, I was in some deep, really messy stuff where I was brainwashed by him basically. And I read this text, and it was exactly what this kid was doing to me, kind of point by point, which is this spiritual manipulation. And I was thinking about Pippa as so different than the rascal guru type. There's still this spiritual playfulness, but the fool figure is a lot more, it's not exploiting her power or trying to dominate. It's almost undermining.
It's hard to imagine the fool being part of a cult.
Exactly, yeah, the fool is the antithetical to the cult consciousness.
Yeah, when she lived in the Bay Area, she hung out with the survival research people that did all the kind of wild, when you feel like you're going to get killed in the performance explosions and weird machine stuff. And I hung out with Terrence McKenna's wife. She said he was a really bad husband.
Oh, really? I mean, again, this is
this
surprising.
person that studies mushrooms in a place called Occidental north of San Francisco.
And John C. Lilly is famous for doing these experiments with dolphins where he got his very young female assistant to basically have sex with the dolphin. through it. But these were like heralded as these heroes of consciousness, but in retrospect, they were like abusers. But Pippa, at this moment, is hanging out with them and then decides, her also heroes are Wendy O. Williams and Lisa Lyon and Anais Nin. And she,
The one that surprised me was Andrew Weil.
Yes.
He's like the New Age doctor.
He's still a New Age doctor. He has a big social media presence. And like, he's done pretty Family Guy. He's very, not like the TV show, but he's a family man. I wanted to read 2 little excerpts in this from Pippa's own words, and then maybe talk about the William Blake fool line to close it off, which you mentioned meant something to you at some point.
I don't have anything to say about it.
That's okay. We also don't have to say anything.
But the fool and William. Yeah, and that kind of then like the fool and William Blake would kind of tie the cult stuff to the Pippa stuff, because all that is, it's all like this religious iconography that he made up. If I remember correctly from my undergrad days.
I picked up it's a funny thing because Pippa always quotes this one line from Proverbs of Hell and removing it from the rest of the context, which is really interesting. And very Pippa, you're just going to use this one thing and it's going to service your own philosophy and art practice. And then I read it and I was like, oh, it's such a weird, like the rest of the stuff that frames it is weird. But first I want to read Pippa in her own words on Fools. So Pippa has had 2 interviews in Interview magazine. The first one was in 1990 and is an interview with Glenn O'Brien. And by then, she was already living in the Bay Area and pursuing gender-affirming care, but she agreed to be in the all-male review issue, which has Johnny Depp on the cover. I forget who else is in it. It's like, notable masculine men of this era. Let's see. Who else was in it? Johnny Depp, John Waters, Jimmy Stewart, Iggy Pop, Roberto Benigni, and Bobby Brown, and Pippa Garner. Mike Kelly, Alex Katz, etc. But she agreed to it because she will always take a press opportunity. And the last question Glenn asked her is, are you still interested in a mass audience? When the Better Living catalog came out, you reached a lot of people. Pippa responds, I don't know. I suppose so, in a certain way. The way I see myself is as a majestic fool. I'm thinking of the court fool who has wisdom as well as a certainty and mixes the 2 in skillful ways. At some point, the fool is more absurd than wise, but at the same time, the majestic fool always has a kind of dignity. It's not pride. I think pride is self-destructive, but majestic. I guess I'll stay with that. And that's how that interview ends. And then after Pippa really started publicly gender hacking, she kind of doesn't fall off the map, but falls into a different map. So she was quite public in the 80s. She was at the Whitney Museum, she was in Interview magazine, and then she moves to the Bay and she's self-publishing in like independent queer local newspapers. That's the extent of it. A lot of her former community were quite harsh and just did not understand at all. But so in 2015, she's had this resurgence, young generations understand her, appreciate her. And in 2021, she was in Interview magazine again, so this is 31 years later. And she's interviewed by Hayden Dunham, who's a friend of hers. And she has a little bit about the fool also. I'll read that. Let's see. Pippa says, I'm female but not period correct. See, someone told me to go fuck myself and I took him literally. Hayden, you're so funny. This is a perfect opening for your relationship with the jester. Garner, I have my own interpretation of things that I've picked up through reading and experience, so let's see. Within the court systems in Europe, there were jesters and fools. The fools weren't part of the court in any formal way, or they didn't have to behave according to the rules of the court. They could be slobs, they could eat with their hands if they wanted, they couldn't do anything, and they were supposed to actually, because that was in contrast to what was considered important to the traditions and regulations of the ruling structure. Fools could play with it. Kings tended to have fools who were very smart and had insights and wisdom. They knew what was going on in a deeper way. If your attitude is that things are amazing but they're also absurd, you're able to see patterns that link behavior. The fools were like psychologists in a way. The kings would have somebody like that, maybe several, who would give them advice. They could interpret the culture in a way that was not bound to traditions, and just get ideas, feelings, and thoughts. And sometimes that might save the king's life. If there was a plot to kill him or something, the fool might be able to pick that up before anyone else. What the fool is really, I think, is a transitional link between true depth of understanding and the superficial level that most cultures survive on. And Hayden replies, "Sounds like you." And Garner replies, "Oh, I don't know. What I've created is a couple. It's like I'm on a constant double date with my own body." So it's very Pippa to say something direct and kind of profound, and then as soon as it's echoed back to her, she's going to change the subject and crack a joke.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, it's just that interview, the first one reminded me of her going on that Monster Car show.
Oh yeah, Monster Garage.
Monster Garage, yeah. You know, like with all the jocks, and then kind of winning them over. You know, at first it's kind of like, they're just like, and then they did seem to really...
Oh yeah, they loved her. This is one of the videos. There's two videos in the corner over there. One is her appearance on the Johnny Carson show in 1982, and then Monster Garage in 2004, and she was invited on it. And it's like I don't know, it's like beyond jock. It's like so masculine. It's like not masculine, like in terms of like ah.
I guess she was on more than one.
She was on more than one.
Huh?
Yeah, she was on more than one episode.
Yeah, I saw, there's one of them on YouTube, I found, so I watched it on YouTube.
They were totally struck by her. They helped her move to Long Beach, California. Sandra Bullock was dating the guy at the time, and Pippa was became good friends with Sandy. Yeah, she's just totally herself, I think, everywhere that everyone else has to adapt. And there's the confidence and, I don't know. Yeah, but that same year she was in this book called Trappings, which was like a feminist fashion book. And it's a very cool coupling because she's traversed so many different spaces that didn't communicate with one another. Like people who were buying this Trappings feminist fashion book would not watch Monster Garage, wouldn't even know. And that's something that's been interesting, or an attempt we've been trying to do with the book and the show, is to bring all of these diverse manifestations of Pippa that are in high and low and everywhere, and understand how they
Well,
work.
this kind of reminds me of Kathy Acker too, because she was in all these different communities. And after she died, I went to this ceremony where we were transferring her ashes to an urn. And so there were all these people from Kathy's life, and there's this one person from the gym, Juliet or something like that, who knew Kathy from the gym for 3 years and never knew she was a writer. You know what I mean? That she would have this, and it was funny. She had a switchblade, and she was really tough. But so I do think I'm sure they would have been best friends.
Yeah, I think there's so much in common. Kathy has that amazing essay about the language of the body, about bodybuilding, and Pippa's super into bodybuilding. And the way that they talk about it is almost the exact same thing as this moving meditation. And these super intellectual people trying to get more into the body and other spheres of knowing. We could let people ask questions or wrap it up, unless there's something you want to say. Yeah.
I think you did a great job.
You did a great job. Well, if anyone has questions, you can ask a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What was her personality like? Because when I see her work, I feel like there's such a sense of humor in kind of an interesting way. I'm just curious, did that person have? What was their character like, rather?
You mean Pippa?
Yeah.
Well, she's still around. She basically controls the conversation, and it always goes off kilter in ways that I enjoy. But wouldn't you say that?
Yeah.
It's like you think you're going here, and then suddenly.
Yes. Well, she can't be here tonight or today. It's an afternoon. It's all the same to me at this point. When you're under these lights, you can be night or day. I've been here a lot. She is having surgery on Monday because her ass implant ruptured. which is very Pippa to not be able to make her big New York City debut because an ass implant ruptured. And she wouldn't mind me telling that. She has a tattoo on her back of a post-it that says, "I is an ass."
That's really good.
But yeah, personality, charming, charismatic, really intense, like intense energy. And very, very smart. But there's different sides of her, and you never know what side you'll get on a certain day. And I have my preferred sides, but I like it, gentle. I like the gentle, soft Pippa. We talk about cats and like books, but that's because that's what I am. So I'm being selfish in that way.
I have a question here. I was curious that for a long time, Pippa's work didn't necessarily circulate within the art world, and more recently it is circulating, to a pretty significant degree in the art world. I was curious about Pippa's relationship with the art world, or interest in the art world, or her understanding of how these objects function vis-a-vis the art world.
I think that's a really good question that relates to this Fool premise. I mean, a lot of the reason it's circulating in our world is because of Christopher, who runs the gallery in LA, and he is Pippa's gallerist. I think Pippa belongs in the art world, but it's very classic Pippa Fool that she doesn't want what she belongs to. Like her when I see her work, I'm like, I know who would love this and understand it thoroughly and be comfortable with the ambiguities. And that is primarily an art world audience or literary audience, but she likes, I think it's caught up with who she was raised by, and wanting more mainstream or normative attention, but also to be deviant within that. And whereas deviancy is pretty accepted in the art world, par for the course, at least at this point. But she doesn't know who Mike Kelly is, right? But she would love the work, but she kind of almost willfully is ignorant of a lot of things that I think she also doesn't know queer theory. She doesn't know Paul Preciado. She doesn't know all of these other concurrent intellectual and artistic traditions that she is totally in kinship with. But she knows Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp, and she knows Monster Garage and everything about re-engineering a car and whatnot. So she I don't know, she's down to be anywhere, and I think one of her foolish things that's both really charming. As a biographer, I love it, but if I was trying to manage her career, it would drive me crazy, is that she accepts every invitation without, vetting whether the invitation is going to be good for her or not, is my understanding, but she also doesn't pursue anything, so she's not like, I want to be in the White Cube Gallery or whatever, but she's down to be here, she's down to be anywhere. She'll go to Monster Garage, and she's going to transform each of those contexts in her own rules and way, in the same way she transforms Dodie's essay into, puppeteering it. Like, she has this mastery of it all. That's just my impression, though.
She also, I know this is weird, but she has a really strong psychic ability. I mean,
Yeah.
I just feel this, and then there's a text from her. You know what I mean? You've noticed that too?
Oh, yeah.
It's very powerful.
Very powerful.
Like
Witchy.
magician or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
but she's obsessed with art. If you actually look at her private writings, it's like she has so much insecurity about not being considered a real artist. Her wife was also the assistant to Ed Ruscha, and she was like, I was never like Ed Ruscha or Chris Burden, I was never like these men, they were the real artists. And when she says this, I don't think she fully believes it, but it's almost like, again, this foolish parroting and mirroring of the dominant culture of the time, which was like, those men were the real artists, and she's going to persist and make art until someone is like, no, this is the artist you are. But she never was like, I'm the artist. Her ex-wife, Nancy, really helped her take on that position that she is an artist. It's the only thing that makes sense of everything that she did.
and everything that I've read and seen of the LA art scene in those early days was incredibly macho.
Oh, so
Like, I
macho.
don't know what you're supposed to,
Yeah.
like 50s housewife.
And really, misogynistic, and part of the reason I understand that Nancy dropped out of the art world was because of that misogyny. Even though Nancy is a really talented artist who painted some of the backgrounds of Ed's work, and they're in the Whitney, or at MoMA right now, her work, but she dropped out the same year that Pippa moved to the Bay Area. So yeah, it was a shitty situation. Yeah.
I'm curious about her relationship to like sort of movements that call themselves trans art movements, or like how she might feel about being interpolated as a trans artist, because obviously that kind of, it's hard to divorce the current like attention that's being put on her work with the fact that people are now, that trans art movements are more sort of mainstream, but also that kind of identity political claim can also be quite, I could imagine her like having not wanting that.
She's down for everything, right? So it's like, and then I think everything will inform her and change it, and she's going to try to make it her own. But if she was only getting that feedback, I think she would be, but that's not the only interpretation she's getting.
Yeah, the model she had was Christine Jorgensen. And I actually, again, on YouTube, watched the horrible Christine Jorgensen movie, and it was really bad, like a copy of a copy of a copy, which actually made the movie better. It's like, so, the gender stuff in there is like, it's not even, it goes beyond laughable to just like, I don't know, it was really interesting. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, no, I'll watch it.
See, I'm more anal than you are.
No, it's an interesting question. Yeah.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what stepping into Pippa's maybe like personal archive was, and archival kind of like how maybe in her someone in the office here, like either personal artifacts or documentation or letters or whatever. Is that maybe like for somebody that right now said, is it incredibly meticulous? Is it incredibly public already? How was that process like as kind of like Pippa and her relationship to our self-archiving, and how she wants the public to also see it?
There's a good story with one of her friends from Santa Fe, New Mexico. She lived there after the Bay in the 2000s. His name is Cooper Lee Bombardier, and he invited Pippa to participate in this like trans queer drag kind of, or I guess it was like a cabaret rather. It was a cabaret, sort of a variety show. And he had seen Pippa around, and she was like this personality who would wear these different t-shirt every day in Santa Fe, a small community. And anyway, he invites Pippa to participate in this. She says yes. And like a couple of days before her performance, this envelope is on his doorstep, and inside the envelope is like clippings of all of Pippa's past press and accolades and whatnot. And she had created this like CV in these like Xeroxes of all of her past work. And he was like, oh, I'm living with a celebrity, basically. Because Pippa, and it's Dodie talks about this wanting to be seen and retreat, this introverted exhibitionist. Pippa has had big fame and then totally retreated. She talks about gender hacking as a way to sabotage, a certain amount of that fame when she was being interpreted in a way she didn't like. But this push-pull, I think it shows up throughout her life. And she's at the end of her life now, and she's having the push out, super extroverted moment. I think she's down for it. But again, then there's the tension of her own demise in that. But all to say, she archived everything. She has her childhood drawings, which I think is a testimony to her mom, probably, and she was really close with her mom. But she had, all this correspondence she sent to people like Andrew Weil, and she Xeroxed all of her own correspondence. They kept copies of her own correspondence. And she says she doesn't want to be historicized. She doesn't care about history, but she has mapped her own personal history more than any single person I've ever met, ever, which makes writing something about her and doing a show like this very totally possible. So it's that funny contradiction. And it's a bit of a mess, but it's being cleaned up now. And Stars Gallery Christopher has talked about maybe making a public digital archive online because her audience is so young. And so instead of like hiding it out at the Getty or something like this, having there be a more contemporary thing that young people could access and read all her notes and stuff. Maybe there's one more question if anyone has them, and then we're going to wrap up and sell books, and Pippa was going to be on the phone. Okay, we're done. Thanks, Dodie.